I think AI is very real. It'll transform financial services, already transforming investment processes that are used to be just research driven and data driven are now very much AI driven.
AI is not machine learning, it's not ML. There is a huge difference between these two. So when you talk about AI, it's not the same AI that is in the literature, in basically academia.
First of all, AI is not a hack. It improves something, the working efficiency, the productivity, all these type of things we can see. But AI, I would say, is in a very, very early stage. It's far from mature.
Just sit back and think 10 years from today as two things happen. Advances in chip manufacturing that brings in more power to the computational capabilities of those things. We're still in the early days of extreme ultraviolet technology in terms of shrinking the type of chips. So 10 years from now, and I still think there's still some legs to Moore's law, you're going to look at, and then when the world goes real quantum, then the capabilities of processing is going to change the way we think about things.
You're going to see AI applied to creating, content before you see it applied to making asset allocation decisions, before you see it applied to completely autonomously performing in heart surgery. Because there are different levels of risk at stake in these types of activities.
We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and the intersection in finance. So we have 2 allocators on here and we have 3 scientists on here. So let's kind of go through each person. I'll start at the very far end here. Uche Orji, he's a former Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, now a Goodfellow recipient, expert on asset allocation, running a sovereign wealth fund, and just a great brain to pull from. So next to Uche is, I can't see, Yuri Ferruccio. And Yuri is the CEO of Concordia, a venture-backed modular risk management platform that unifies digital assets into a transparent and seamless financial system. Interesting about Yuri is that he worked at JD AI. JD is a Chinese tech company, a NASDAQ 100 Asian internet giant with more than 400 billion in annual e-commerce transactions. But he helped found their AI business there and worked in their innovation area. Also, another interesting fact about Yuri is he worked at D. Shaw Group, which is a quantitative hedge fund. I believe it's based out of New York, right? Yep. Next to Yuri is Peter Canez. And Peter's got a very fascinating background. He's a former chief investment officer of BlackRock, but really it's Barclays Global Investors. For those old enough, BGI was a major passive investment firm. BlackRock got a sweet deal in buying BGI during the crisis, but Peter grew BGI's AUM from $5 billion to $40 billion in the United States, doubling AUM. Also, Peter held a wide range of positions at various asset management firms, and he's advisor to many companies. Next to Peter, we have a new panelist that joined us. His name is Max Lee. He's a faculty member of the Department of Electrical Engineering at Columbia University. Also, he's the founder and CEO of ORT, which is a Web3 data cloud company. And before that, he held jobs at Qualcomm Research working on 4G and 5G, which I'm holding a 5G phone right now. So I'm very pleased to have Max with us. And last but not least, we have Maha Achur. Maha is quite accomplished, as we've seen today. She has over 150 pending patent applications, MIT graduate, just a brilliant inventor, and I'm so pleased to have her join this panel and educate us on artificial intelligence with the intersection of finance. So let's begin with some questions here. Is the AI hype real, or is it something that the tech companies are trying to do to increase their earnings, right? Is there really meat to the AI craze, right? We last saw the advent of crypto and blockchain. A lot of tech companies went into that. Now we're seeing a lot of the tech companies like Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, I can go down the list here, embarking on AI technologies. Is it hype? or is it for real? Now, just to kind of lay the groundwork here, there are also some ethical questions about AI that people are discussing. What does an AI dominated future look like? People are worried about losing jobs possibly, right? There's the common example of the ATM machine, right? That the ATM machine was going to destroy bank teller jobs, right? So that's also a topic that we are going to cover, right? How does that going to affect displacement with employees? So let's talk about the AI hype. I'm going to start with Peter in the middle here. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you think it's hype or is it a real thing?
Yeah, so, I come at AI from the perspective of financial services, obviously, because I spent so much of my time there. And, I think AI is very real. It'll transform financial services. It's already transforming investment processes that are used to be just research driven and data driven are now very much AI driven, and the sort of humans in the loop, so to speak, as they say, is much less than humans in the loop when I was running global investment processes. And then something that I think is particularly where AI is going to have a huge impact is when it's integrated into blockchains. So that's a big topic, but I think that's what's going to make financial services unrecognizable in 10 years.
Maha, would you like to add to that?
Sure. So I think this is a very important topic. We're living a revolution. And if you really want to be educated about AI, you have to learn two things. Number one, OpenAI doesn't know why it works. And as long as we don't answer that question, it's always going to be a hype. Number two, is AI is not machine learning, it's not ML. There is a huge difference between these two. So when you talk about AI, it's not the same AI that is in the literature, in basically academia. And that is basically the real part. So I always like to give the analogy, if Newton and Galileo had supercomputers and they were running these experiments of throwing rocks and feathers and collecting all the data and running all these nice ML and whatever algorithms, do you think they would have discovered the gravity? They would have discovered that equation? Probably not. So the question is, AI today or ML is on the wrong path. But we will continue because it sets the path and it collects the data, but in parallel. And that's exactly what I'm passionate about and what I'm doing now with a group in London, with a group in the Bay Area, and maybe even MIT, is that try to understand the first question, why it works, and how we can make it right, and how we can make it efficient.
Thank you. And Max, can you add to that too, because you're also a scientist over here?
Yeah, sure. I've been working in the AI field for more than 10 years. I would say, first of all, AI is not a hype. It improves something, working efficiency, the productivity, all these type of things we can see. But AI, I would say, is in a very, very early stage. It's far from mature, just like what she said, and even we have no idea. I'm working in academia. To be honest, no one in academia understands why AI works or machine learning works. Machine learning is something, we know some mathematical foundations of it, but for AI, large language model, deep learning model, deep neural network, we have no idea. So it's much more like a black box. So that's why I said, like what I said, it's a very, very early stage. We don't need to worry about that much, about AI gonna replace everything in the world. So this has happened twice in AI history. The first time is like 10 years ago, back to 2013, when people find out the deep learning really works, and people feel very, very excited. They think, oh, the AI can replace everything, can do everything. But at the end of the day, people find out it can only do some CV, computer vision, or natural language processing, right? So nothing else. It cannot be easily applied to autonomous driving, financial decisions, governments, nothing. It's just a very simple CV. This is a dog or a cat, something like that, or the natural language processing. And last year, this is the second time, when OpenAI launched this ChatGPT, people feel so excited. As it seems like, whoa, this thing is awesome. It can replace everything, and it's revolutionary. But the fact is, over the past year, people find out it is very useful in writing. You use ChatGPT in writing emails, polish your articles, help you draft something, but nothing else. You cannot rely on ChatGPT to make decisions for your business, or write, like apply it to rocket science, to autonomous driving. Nothing. It's just some simple writing work. So.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I think I disagree with you on this one. I truly believe GPT-3 Plus or GPT-4 is essential in finance. If you go and just watch some YouTube, the financial projection now, you don't even need a stockbroker agent, you don't need a financial advisor, you can actually use the tools that they have.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is that they scan data, they scan audio files, they scan video files, and they extract data in real time. That's something that human being cannot do. Right. So you don't underestimate that. It's not only for language, it's going to be very big in finance too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the candid answers, actually. I read a story in the news, and I guess a lady used it for a eulogy or something. She got caught. So writing an AI or writing a ChatGPT eulogy for somebody. Let's jump onto the investment side of things. I have two allocators back here, Uche, Orji. Let's talk about, imagine you're head of a sovereign wealth fund again. What did the Nigerian sovereign wealth fund, did it invest in venture capital? Was it a fund investor? Did you look at domestic investments? And also, what are your thoughts on fintech and AI in general?
Well, thank you very much. Well, I just listening to the conversations about how this is going to change finance. I think the first thing that's probably going to go in the long run will be roles like the allocator role or even the analyst role. And just bear in mind that these things are still being trained. We're still in very early stages. I remember being in the room in 2008 when I was covering NVIDIA, and NVIDIA announced CUDA and the transformer technology that we're going to put in place. No one knew where this was going to go. And just sit back and think 10 years from today as two things happen. Advances in chip manufacturing that brings in more power to the computational capabilities of those things. We're still in the early days of extreme ultraviolet technology in terms of shrinking the type of the chips. So 10 years from now, and I still think there's still some legs to Moore's law, you're going to look at, and then when the world goes real quantum, then the capabilities of processing is going to change the way we think about things. The second thing is this thing is heavily memory intensive, right? And so, I hear people say it's a hype, and I think, certainly, like most things, valuations tend to get ahead of itself, but let's not underestimate the ability of artificial intelligence in changing the world. And I like the commentary about we don't really know where this is, why it works. We will know eventually, but in 10 years from now, I can see how it's going to change a lot of things. And let's sit back and think about MC running the NSI or running another fund, which I'm running right now. I'm running a small fund called Titan Gate. I think there are some areas where I will see AI as perhaps superior to people in general. Anything that requires you to recall a number of things quickly and react instantly, you can trust the machine to do that better than the human being will. One area that we're looking at investing right now is using this in care homes, using this in hospitals. 10, 15 years from today, I think you're going to find in rural Africa, AI general practitioners. It's going to be cheaper in places where you cannot get a doctor for this to be able to make diagnoses for people. This is going to be very transformational. In finance, like I said, I don't think that 20 years from today, the stock analyst job is going to exist. I think it's going to change. I think machines will do a lot more of that. People will probably then apply themselves to high intelligence. I love what you said about ATM machines, but those jobs are gone. But guess what? The ATM itself is going to be replaced by fintech, right? So it's, nobody uses ATMs anymore in Nigeria, really. I mean, people just use their phones and then do the transfers. But at the same time, jobs are still being created. So my sense is while it's going to remove some jobs that require people to really recall a number of things and do repetitive jobs, building models and all that, I think other jobs will be created by it. I would expect that this will do asset allocation a lot better than humans will, because it can process large data across various macroeconomic indicators and create an asset allocation in a more dynamic way as well. Because the analyst, puts up an asset allocation model, he spends forever on CNBC trying to sell it to people and travel around. By the time it comes back, the world has changed.
Yeah.
AI will do that almost every day by the minute. I think this is going to make quant trading right now is expensive. You can't even get in some of those funds. You have to pay 3% management fee and 30% of profit. Best thing is going to make the ability for the ordinary person to have access to some of those technologies that people do not have. It's early days. But my sense is 10 years from today, just visualize what's going to happen when we have access to cheaper computation power. It's expensive. Some of those H100 chips of NVIDIA is $200,000 to $50,000. It will come down in price eventually. And this is what's going to make it capable. And when Peter was talking about putting on blockchain, it's going to become even more capable and have some of these things resident on your phones. The world is going to be very different. I don't think it's a bubble. Yeah, some things have got ahead of itself, but I think that the world is just about to change. And we're at the very early stages of a long journey.
It's amazing. I used to work at CalPERS State Pension Plan a long time ago, and they still do the same thing. They still rely on the investment consultants for asset allocation decisions, still done the same way it's been for 40 years, right? They map out the expected returns of asset classes, and they try to predict the future, and you can see that the returns aren't always there. So I think they're on their 10th CIO and probably 8 years. You've had a great tenure over at the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth, surpassing many of them. And also, I used to work for a company called Thompson Financial, and I remember back in the day that Wall Street analyst estimates were everything. People looked to that number, that whisper number, and now that there's ways where they're using, there's a company called Star Mine where they weighted the analyst estimates. They gave favor to the best Wall Street analysts, and that was cutting edge. But now it's going even further down the curve.
Right.
So I'm going to pivot over to Uri, right? So Uri, you're also in the world of blockchain, but you're also an allocator. You built this platform at Concordia. Can you tell us about where you're seeing the advantages of allocating capital in this arena?
Yeah, I guess just to segue from the last question to this, if you ask yourself, was broadband, right, or the infrastructure for broadband, was that overhyped? Right? Because famously, the companies that laid the cables weren't the ones who captured the value, but it's what enabled the next generation of digital technologies to occur. You hear a lot of people who aren't at the scale of sovereign wealth funds wringing their hands right now because there are questions around how will value capture and defensibility work in a world where you're seeing so many things built on top of open source models. Most investors can't play at the level of ChatGPT or even Anthropic. These are huge scale games. It almost looks like a broadband type of moment where, how many people will be winners? Will it be a winner take all or a winner take most? What's going to happen to the people who invest all the other billions of dollars that are being spent to train these models at a much faster rate than before Sam Altman, convinced everybody to fund OpenAI? But this is obviously pushing forward a certain type of application that's creating a lot of value and a lot of innovation and also capturing the popular imagination. I think for us and what we focus on, it's more near term and it's smaller in scale than a sovereign wealth fund. We don't have to worry about what should our national strategy be. Is there a strategic angle as well as a financial return angle? And I think when you look at it from that perspective, you have to always ask yourself, what's at stake if I apply AI to this? You're going to see AI applied to creating content before you see it applied to making asset allocation decisions, before you see it applied to completely autonomously performing in heart surgery. Because there are different levels of risk at stake in these types of activities. And I think finance is an interesting one because it's tricky, right? If you look at finance and you think about a spectrum of the least regulated to the most regulated parts of it, AI has challenges kind of in many of these areas. The more regulated you get, the more you have to have explainability built into your model, to go back to what you were talking about. That's really tough right now. And so for us, we're building something like a version of ICE, right? Almost like a clearinghouse on decentralized rails. The most important thing for us is to be able to pass a risk committee or a compliance committee. So we want to be as deterministic as possible right now. We need to be able to explain how the billiard balls interact. That'll change eventually if we can be more, sophisticated but also explainable. That's not very easy to do right now. But there are other areas where the pattern recognition capabilities and everything that you talked about apply well. And ultimately, it's probably not a hype, but like with many things, the things that people are the most afraid of and the most excited about may not correlate to what's most interesting 10 years from now. I think that's the part that's tough. I TA'd a class taught by a guy named Leon Firth, who was Al Gore's national security advisor for the whole Clinton administration. And I'll never forget, the thing I took away was that the class was called Foresight. And the first thing he said in every version of that class was, there's no such thing as a crystal ball. It's much more effective to decrease the time it takes for you to react to something that happens than it is to try to predict what will happen far in the future. And I think when it comes to AI, at least for the way that we think about investment, we try to be fairly applied and keep our feet on the ground.
Thank you, and I really like that broadband answer, because that is an industry that has able to create a lot of other companies and firms to like to grow, even for ourselves. I mean, internet is faster and more efficient. I want to jump on, as we talked a little bit about blockchain already, Peter, what are the implications of the integration of artificial intelligence and blockchain, particularly for a layer 0 blockchain? Now, for the audience here, can you first talk about what a layer 0 blockchain is, for those who might not know about digital assets that well, and then answer that question?
Yeah, sure. I think effectively layer 0 is the initial layer that sits on top of a network that can launch other chains on top of it. So you can think of a layer 0 as sort of a master chain that can launch sort of work chains off that master chain. So it's basically the first level of the infrastructure. I think the implications, why, at least from my perspective, the implications are so profound about the integration of the two, is that if you look at the modern sort of next generation blockchains that these guys are involved in and I'm involved in, that are scalable, they're regulated, but in particular, everything on chain is a smart contract. And so for me, the hero of Web3 is actually the smart contract. Because the smart contract is a very interesting technology because it's digital and it's set of conditions pre-specified, and then it executes automatically once those conditions. So that's very different from a traditional contract where they start executing and then they debate about whether the conditions were met, right? Well, but one of the things that's really important about it is it's digital, right? So one of the things I don't think financial services is kind of caught up to is eventually you're going to program the duration of money. You want to talk about Silicon Valley Bank? They had a duration mismatch. Oh, yeah. All they had to do, they can program in the duration and have assets and liabilities match each other. But in particular, what you're going to see is you're going to see AI embedded in those smart contracts since they're digital, and so you're going to see AI being able to, essentially a smart contract can do data analysis endogenously. It can do predictive analytics. It'll monitor the network itself and change parameters and dynamics itself. So, in my view, the future of Web3, which is also the future of financial services, is essentially AI-driven smart contracts on top of a distributed ledger. And so when you put them together, if you think about financial services, or particularly asset management, where I spent much of my life, everything's a transaction. It boils down to some kind of transaction. Every transaction has a supply chain. Every supply chain will be impacted by the immutability and transparency and end-to-end record that blockchain delivers. And when you put on top of that AI-driven smart contracts, where you're automatically settling things, you're going to remove a lot of manual intervention. You're going to lose a lot of hands in the middle of the supply chain. They're just passing one thing on to another. So it's in my view, it's profound.
It's very fascinating to also think about how, you can look at a real estate transaction, and when you buy a house, you have to go through all these escrow and the title agent to check the title insurance and all this stuff, and it's still quite antiquated, but this is something that's going to change. And I
TikTok.
Yeah.
TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. I like to also jump to the ethics part of AI because I think it can be manipulated. I think raw data sources can be manipulated. There's stories where people would put in a bunch of information and then change the AI algorithm. Now, as AI starts to get adopted by financial advisors, broker dealers, other types of financial intermediaries, and they're delivering earnings reports, all these kinds of things. They're scanning, processing financial data and documents, images, audios, videos, which I believe that's called multimodal. Am I right? Okay, I'm reading up on this stuff. How could that be affected by hackers? I think Maha, you want to talk about first, and then I'll go over to Max.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a couple of points here. Number one, like in the financial sector, now we have a lot of fake videos, fake audios. I can now make Steve Jobs talk about any speech, just write a speech and make Steve Jobs give the speech and put it online. The question is that this will be the data that it will be trained on, right? Because it's basically all the data available. So how can you account for that, right? So that's the danger, right? And I don't think even OpenAI has a solution for this today. Number two, the ethics is with like autonomous driving. We see so many robotaxis now running in San Francisco and in LA. If you have a robotaxi that has to make a choice, killing a pedestrian or killing a child on a stroller, or killing the riders. So how can they make such a decision, right? And regulations are still working on that. So AI is, in my opinion, it's still at its infancy, but I fully agree with Yuri. It has to move forward. And there will be, of course, casualties, there will be lessons learned, but humanity always prevailed at the end. I have big faith in human race.
Will it be lawyers, though, blocking everything?
I hope not. I hope not. Regulations and guidelines, for sure.
Yeah, that's that case that I was brought up because I was thinking about all these autonomous startups raising hundreds of millions of dollars. Billions, yeah. Even by some sovereign wealth funds and some tech companies. And I'm like, when it comes down to, because I have a lot of lawyers as clients, and I was like, well, that decision of, what's the value of human life, can you make that decision? And that's very difficult. Yeah. And that will probably be litigated by the Supreme Court. Max, do you have any opinions on ethics and AI?
Yeah, first of all, I fully agree on the regulation part. And I'm gonna chime in a little bit from the technical perspective. I think the raw data could be part of the raw data could be fake data or something, and then you feed that data into the model, and the model gonna have some problem, right? So from technical perspective, I know some people are working on that, try to avoid this. For example, I can give you some example. For example, in blockchain area, there's a knowledge called zero proof knowledge technologies, and it can show it's a technology can make sure that the data comes from the right source. Let's say if I ask somebody send me the data, say I need that data from that database or from that blockchain, on-chain data, whatever, and I can check your zero knowledge proof. And by seeing that proof, I know that you do what I told you. It's not you get some fake data, create some data, on your own, right? So that is one way that people are trying to get the true data and non-manipulated data. But again, this is from technology, and along with the technology, you always need a regulation and put them together, and you will make it better. And another thing I want to mention is to fundamentally to resolve the problem from the root. Again, back to the first question, we have to build the mathematical foundation of AI, rather than just keep feeding data into the black box and make it work, right? So this methodology may be wrong, but we need to moving forward because we have nothing else, right? We need a lesson to learn, but in the meanwhile, we need a mathematical foundation. And if we have that mathematical foundation, these formulas, these equations, we don't need the data to build an AI agent.
I've always thought about creating a system where you just type in a Google search and be like, what would happen to these stocks if the oil price went down and this thing happened here, and how accurate that would be. Probably be a billionaire company. But that's still in its infancy, I guess. I want to focus on Yuri and Uche. Maybe Yuri, you first. In the next 3 to 5 years within the AI, even blockchain space, where do you see the best opportunities? what specific sector are you really focusing in on? Is it financial services? Is it healthcare? What do you, I mean, for your fund or for your vehicle?
I think it was in 2017 maybe that Y Combinator eliminated AI as a track or as a sector on the argument that it had become a universal tool that is applicable to almost anything. I mean, you could almost, for practical purposes, substitute the word data science for AI, and it would mean the same thing when it comes to actual commercial application of the technology, not the research side. I mean, from our perspective, some of the questions we're asking ourselves is, if you're going to invest in an AI company now, is there defensibility? Where do you find it? I think we're exploring things like applications of AI that can improve the user experience and own the new sort of first interface with the user. That's similar to what Facebook did to the media industry, right? You sort of aggregate everything and you push everything into being a commoditized supplier for you. But I think that the most interesting applications are probably somewhat verticalized applications of AI in specific areas. And I think people probably worry a little bit too much about buzzwords. Hopefully we're moving from, in this sort of data cycle, from a phase where you talk about AI, IoT, blockchain, blah, blah, all these emerging technology things. We use these words because they're hard concepts to understand and do, and we have to sort of build them in silos at first. At a certain point, you start then building interoperability and you integrate them. A good example is, you'll see in a couple of weeks at FIS, there's a project called One Amazon, which we're helping a little bit. They're looking to preserve about 50 million hectares of rainforest in the Amazon to start with, and they're going to be doing it with the full support up to the presidential level of all the countries that are involved, and they're going to tokenize each hectare and have a token that represents it. But they have a sort of holistic kind of best practices approach that they're trying to pioneer where, you know, their financial partners, Goldman Sachs, their program managers, AECOM, the largest engineering firm in the Western Hemisphere. And they're also working with media labs at MIT to create kind of an internet of forests approach where they progressively sort of make the forests smarter. And I would say the one area that people probably sleep on a little bit is that almost every new wave in data science is preceded by an advance in sensor technology and also database technology. All the plumbing that controls sort of what kind of data can I get, how expensive and fast or difficult is it for me to sort of store it, normalize it, and do stuff with it. And so, you know, I think that things like creating better sensors that can have higher speed and specificity for, you know, optimizing electrolysis or, you know, things like that. You're going to see a lot of very specific applications that make it much easier to produce hydrogen, or potentially could, you know, make could be part of the solution for making plasma energy sort of net positive, things like that. People think about LLMs because that's what we see every day, and it's exciting, but I think it's these vertical applications where you'll be able to invest and maybe capture more value.
And I remember the term cloud computing, and really just a bunch of computers tied to a network, but that was the big hype. I mean, yeah. Salesforce, nothing against them, by the way. And would you want to add to that? I mean, when you're looking for the investments or, you know, the next 3 to 5 years?
No, I think the comments made here was very correct. I think in the long run, a lot of the niche applications are all going to get integrated into, you know, bigger applications. So there's some graphics niches, for example, today. You're seeing people, you know, text to graphics and, you know, companies like that. You know, 5, 6, 7, 10 years from today, I see all that getting integrated into big tools. So, you know, Microsoft will have it as part of a bigger Bing offering, and let's see what Google is working on with Anthropic and the rest of what Amazon is working on. I think, however, when it comes to investing with some of those things, I go back to a number of things. Who were the big winners eventually in when we went through Web 3.2.0, when we went through from GSM, basic GSM, to 3G, to 4G, to 5G. At the end of the day, as an investor, first of all, go to the guys who sell picks and shovels. Yeah. This was the guys, it's in a gold rush, those guys who made money. So at the end of the day, I still think, you know, I don't know where NVIDIA's valuation ends up. Right, I have a particular thing I need to declare on NVIDIA. I was covering NVIDIA for many years and have a good relationship with the company. But there are other companies that I think that will make their graphics chip just as capable over time. And I don't write off AMD, don't even write off Intel eventually. Although right now it looks very bad for them. So first of all, as an investor, look for those guys who sell picks and shovels for you. Look at, and I think what is really dramatic, what Peter talked about, the biggest cost today to training all these models is what you do with data. How do you store data? How expensive is it to store data? People who can store data on blockchain, Actually, I think that's going to be revolutionary in the sense of how much it's going to cost to store and train your data. And I think this is where the real change is going to happen. Because at the end of the day, this thing is memory intensive, right? It is really memory. Forget about processing. Processing is great, but it's memory intensive. It's actually, right now you're still training some of these things to 2021 data set or 2022 data sets. 10 years from today, this thing has to be current. And it also doesn't have to hallucinate, right? Because right now, many of them still do to varying degrees. The training process still has some time to go. So I think there's a lot that's going to happen on how the data is stored to make it more current. There's a lot that's going to happen on how the processing and the chips that actually run these things. And I'm going back to semiconductor, which is my background really in some ways. I think that this is where you're going to see long-term investment opportunities to begin with. The system integrators who actually can use to build niche systems for law firms or for banks or for asset management companies or for media companies will be great. There'll be few that will be able to stand there. I don't know who they are. We're at this stage where everybody's doing everything. It's not clear who's going to win. But eventually they all get to shake out. I mean, in the very early days, I asked somebody recently, do you remember Alta Vista or Lycos?
Yeah.
These were things that were leading, were exciting companies. So today, so there will be a few winners. What I know is that in each of those verticals, there'll be room for number 1, number 2, and perhaps a number 3, and that's it. So there'll be many companies that'll be shaking out. So it's early days to pick, and while it is early days, I'll stick to buying the companies that make the picks and shovels as opposed to.
That's my next question, because I know we're just about out of time here. I want to go through, starting with Maha, all the way down.
Yes.
Which tech company is leading the race in this area? If you had to place your bets, right? Is it Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, which is more of a social media, is a Chinese company, JD.com, right? Which company do you think is more cutting edge? And just one company, I'm going to go to the list here. So Maha, you first, if you can. I'm putting you on the spot right here because you're the first one.
Sure. No, I'll probably pick Microsoft because they're building their own AI chip as well.
Interesting. Max?
Yeah, the same here because they have the earlier access to this field.
Yep.
Yeah.
Peter?
Actually, I think it's a firm called QuantumX.
QuantumX.
It's a younger firm, more startup, but I think they've done some very intelligent things, like storing data on nodes, on chain. So it's distributed, much more secure, much less expensive, and very scalable. I mean, Microsoft just got hacked and lost 38. How much was it? 38 trillion. Some crazy number. I just don't think. Eventually, they're going to have to come to terms with being centralized, in my view.
You agree?
I probably am less well equipped to make a statement, but I will say QuantumX is a really good example of how you can do something really different. They've actually, the way that they store their data puts data that's been purchased, data that's been scraped, and data that's come from other sources into individual sort of bundles or nodes, which means that, and this is pretty critical, if it becomes illegal to scrape data, they can turn off the bundles that are scraped, and they can still have the model function with the other ones because they're not all hard coded together in one database. Whereas you'd have to shut down a traditional centralized sort of architecture in many cases. So I think things like that can really disrupt the status quo quickly.
I think when the circuit courts ruled on LinkedIn, you can't scrape data, but that was a contentious story. And then, what do you think? Are you going to startups? You're going to name a big.
Can I ask ChatGPT?
Okay, ChatGPT.
Just
Okay.
kidding. Just kidding. No. I'll just say, first of all, declaration. I'm affiliated to QuantumX, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And I think that's something that I'm going to plug it. Just have a look at it. But back to my point, it really is about the underlying infrastructure of how you store data, and I think what QuantumX is doing is great. But if you're looking for a long-term investment opportunity, at the end of the day, there are only 3 companies. There'll be a few startups here and there. GraphCall will start up and flail and then get bought by somebody. At the end of the day, go back to the companies that actually make the real pillars of technology. Go back to those that make equipment, ASML and NVIDIA and AMD, and a few companies on the niche, memory companies. It's interesting that nobody even has talked about some of these memory companies because I think in the long run, this is one area that's going to consume a lot of data. But I'll declare my affiliation to the fact that QuantumX is doing stuff that I think is unique in terms of the way it stores its data. But that's an interesting story for another day at some point. But my sense is, for an investor, at the moment, let's watch this space. There's no doubt in my mind. I think, Microsoft, what they've done is really quite special.
Fair, it's fair. Thank you very much for hearing from these AI experts and investors. Let's give them a round of applause.